According to this rabbi, Jesus revealed that soon there will be 5 regions on earth, where being present will almost certainly mean facing death during the tribulation. The most surprising thing is that most believers currently reside in one of those areas. It is crucial to pay attention to this warning. My name is Rabbi Ezekiel Goldstein, and for 4 decades, I have devoted my life to the deep study of the Torah and the Talmud in a small but revered synagogue in Tel Aviv, Israel. I was born into an Orthodox Jewish family, coming from an illustrious line of rabbinic scholars that stretches back several generations. From a very young age, I was educated in the teachings of the law and the traditions of my people, with a deep commitment to preserving our faith and our identity. My studies at the yeshiva in Jerusalem were a crucial stage in my life, where I stood out for my dedication to the scriptures and my rigor in the interpretation of Mosaic law. Throughout my life, I have had a distant and even conflictive relationship with Christianity. For me, Jesus of Nazareth is nothing more than a first-century Jew, whose teachings were misinterpreted and transformed into a religion that, throughout history, has often persecuted my people. In my sermons at the synagogue, I used to warn my congregants about the dangers of religious syncretism and the growing influence of Christianity in our contemporary culture. My understanding of faith was deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition, and I saw no need to explore beyond the teachings that our ancestors had bequeathed to us. However, on November 5, 2025, everything I had considered true would be profoundly questioned. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual, determined to finish my weekly sermon. It was still dark when I left home, walking towards the synagogue as I did every day. I carried my sacred texts and my writings with me, completely absorbed in the interpretations I would share with my congregants during Shabbat. I crossed the street without realizing that the pedestrian light was red. Today, the sharp sound of tires screeching to a halt echoed in my ears, and in the blink of an eye, I felt the devastating impact of a city bus against my body. There was no time for fear or for praying. I only felt a sharp and intense pain that, almost immediately, transformed into a sensation of floating and peace. In an instant, I was on the street, and the next moment I found myself above my own body, observing the scene with a clarity and serenity I had never experienced before. My body lay motionless, trapped in my own faults. Blood was oozing from my head as passers-by crowded around me. I could hear someone calling for an ambulance, and the bus driver, lost in a state of Shabbat, watched the scene with a distant expression. However, strangely enough, none of that affected me. It was as if I were watching a movie about someone else. At that moment, I felt more alive, more aware and more present than ever within my own body. I understood that my consciousness was not subject to physical limitations or to usual sensory perception. As I meditated on this new reality, I noticed a light beginning to shine to my right. It was not an ordinary light, it was pure, vibrant, and radiant. It not only illuminated the surroundings, but also emanated a love so deep and unconditional that it completely enveloped me. As a student of the scriptures, my mind immediately turned to the Shekinah, that powerful manifestation of the divine presence that our ancestors experienced. However, what happened next completely challenged everything I thought I knew about God and spiritual reality. The light began to take shape, and from its core emerged the figure of a man. His eyes shone like burning flames, but instead of instilling fear, they conveyed a deep sense of being completely understood and loved, despite all my flaws. His face emanated an authority that went beyond any earthly power, yet at the same time reflected a compassion that completely disarmed me. His hands, extended and marked by work, revealed to me that I was in the presence of Jesus of Nazareth, the one whom my people had rejected, the one whom I myself had despised throughout my life, presented herself before me. Her skin glowed, and her voice resonated like the murmur of many waters, majestic and serene at the same time. "You sought me in the texts," she said, "but you did not find me, because you only sought with the mind and not with the heart. You have studied the prophecies that speak of me, but you have not been able to recognize their fulfillment. Now I am here, not to condemn, but to reveal the truth. Time is a valuable resource that is running out, and my people must be prepared for what is to come." I was left breathless, How could it be possible that I was face to face with Jesus? How could I, an Orthodox rabbi, confront someone I had always considered an imposter? Instead of feeling indignation or skepticism, I was overwhelmed by a love and a truth that penetrated deep into the very core of my being. My academic mind struggled to understand the experience logically, but my soul perceived a truth that went beyond any reasoning. Our gazes met, and in that moment I felt that my entire life was laid bare before us, not to be judged, but to be freed. Every belief, every teaching I had shared, and every interpretation I had defended were being examined, not through the lens of human tradition, but in the light of divine truth. At that moment, I understood how much of my faith was based on intellectual pride and tradition, rather than on an authentic and vibrant relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Who is that? Jesus continued, I have summoned you to look beyond the beautiful and share what I am about to reveal to you. My return is near, closer than many imagine, and there are dangerous places where my people should not be when the tribulation begins. What I am about to reveal to you are not mere metaphors or parables. They are concrete instructions that can mean the difference between life and death for countless souls. As I spoke, the environment around us began to transform. We were no longer suspended over the streets of Tel Aviv. Instead, we were in a place that resembled an imposing mountain, from where we could contemplate the entire land. Continents and nations unfolded before us like a living map, vibrant and full of life. And Jesus began to reveal visions to me about what would happen in the near future. The first vision struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. I saw armies gathering in a region that I immediately recognized as the Middle East, surrounding the city of Jerusalem like vultures stalking their prey. The vision enveloped me in a deep favor, as I could perceive the spiritual darkness emanating from those forces. It was a darkness so dense that it seemed to devour the very light. Pay close attention to that quail, Jesus said with a voice imbued with sadness. Pay close attention to where my people should not be when the final hour arrives. The first place of death will be Judea and all the region surrounding Jerusalem. When you witness the abomination of desolation in the holy place, those who are in Judea must flee immediately to the mountains. Do not attempt to recover your belongings. Do not hesitate for a moment, for the destruction that is coming will be swift and merciless. I watched, horrified, as the scene unfolded before my eyes. I saw a figure of immense wickedness enter the rebuilt Temple of Jerusalem and proclaim himself God, demanding worship from all those who were witnesses to his blasphemous act. At the moment this abomination manifested, the earth trembled with unleashed fury, and earthquakes began to shake the entire region with an intensity never seen before. Buildings that had withstood the passage of centuries crumbled as if they were mere sandcastles, and the ground opened up in deep cracks, swallowing entire neighborhoods. But the most terrifying thing was that the earthquakes were just the beginning of a series of calamities that were yet to come. Fire began to descend from the sky like incandescent hail, devouring everything in its path. The armies surrounding Jerusalem not only directed their weapons towards the city, but also unleashed their fury against all the villages and towns of Judea. I saw the believers who had waited too long to escape, who had hesitated to leave behind their homes and belongings, trapped in a chaos from which they could not escape. However, even in this vision of judgment, I witnessed the infinite mercy of God. Groups of faithful who heard the warning took refuge in secluded caves in the mountains, just as the abomination was revealed. In those hideouts, I was able to observe angels offering protection and supernatural sustenance, just as God had fed the Israelites with manna in the desert centuries ago. That is why the warning is so precise, Jesus explained as the vision unfolded before his eyes. Judea will become the epicenter of my final judgment upon the earth. The spiritual forces of darkness will concentrate all their power there, and no human force will be able to withstand what is to come. Only those who fully trust in my provision and follow my orders to flee when I indicate will survive what is to come. The second vision was even more shocking than the first. The scene transformed, revealing the major cities of the world. Vast urban centers filled with millions of people who, in their daily routines, remained completely unaware of what was coming. I recognized New York, London, Tokyo, Dubai, and countless other metropolises that symbolize the pinnacle of human achievement and wealth. "Look at how they trust their systems," Jesus said, as he pointed to the frantic activity unfolding before us. "They have erected towers that brush the sky and have woven networks that span the globe, but they have forgotten that their power is as fleeting as the grass that withers in a single day." The second place of death is found in any great city that has adopted the appearance of Babylon, relying on human wealth and wisdom instead of on God. As I spoke these words, I witnessed an event that completely challenged everything I thought I knew about the stability of modern civilization. In a matter of seconds, VIC, like cyber attacks, managed to paralyze the electronic systems on which these cities depended for their very survival. The electrical grids went dark simultaneously across several continents, leaving billions of people plunged into darkness. However, this technological collapse was just the beginning of a devastating chain of events. In a matter of minutes, the financial markets, which had been built over decades, completely vanished. Digital currencies, which promised a bright future, lost all their value, and banking systems collapsed irreversibly. The supply chains that provided food, medicine, and fuel to the cities were completely disrupted. This situation left millions of people trapped in concrete jungles with no means of livelihood. The cities, which once stood with strength and resilience, transformed into deadly traps in a matter of hours. Without electricity, without access to drinking water, without food distribution, and without communication networks, panic spread among the urban population like an uncontrollable fire. The traveler, desperate, found herself in a constant struggle for the scarce supplies that were still available. Emergency services were overwhelmed, and the government authority had completely collapsed. In an hour, Jesus solemnly declared, "The wealth of these great cities will be shattered. Those who place their trust in human systems rather than in divine provision will find themselves trapped in monuments to human pride, which have turned into tombs for the unsuspecting." However, once again, we can glimpse divine mercy, even in the midst of judgment. I witnessed how believers in these cities received supernatural warnings urging them to leave before the imminent collapse. Entire families sold their belongings and moved to rural areas, while others listened to the voice of the Holy Spirit guiding them to relocate, despite the apparent security offered by urban life. These devotees heard the gentle voice of God and managed to escape the trap just before it closed. The third vision that Jesus revealed to me was, without a doubt, the most deceptive of all, as it was a place where many believers might naturally think they would be safe. The scene that unfolded before me revealed vast underground bunkers and fortified shelters scattered throughout the territory. They were places where the rich and powerful had invested billions of dollars, convinced that they had created impenetrable refuges against the chaos reigning on the surface. "Behold the pride of man," exclaimed Jesus, his voice imbued with deep sadness. "Observe how they place their trust in their own strength and wisdom, instead of in my provision. These underground strongholds will transform into the third place of death, not because of what happens on the surface, but because of what they symbolize in the human heart." I watched in astonishment as the vision unfolded, revealing luxurious bunkers filled with provisions that would last for years, state-of-the-art air filtration systems, and all the comforts one could imagine. The people who inhabited these shelters congratulated themselves on their foresight and meticulous preparation, convinced that they had managed to evade the imminent judgment thanks to their wealth and careful planning. However, what I witnessed next filled me with a deep sadness. These shelters, meticulously crafted by human hands and sustained with dedication and resources, began to crumble in ways their creators had never imagined. The complex systems that sustained life in the depths of the earth began to fail. When the electromagnetic pulses caused by cosmic disturbances damaged their electronic components, the air became polluted, food reserves deteriorated, and the very walls that once promised protection turned into tombs. However, the physical problems paled in comparison to the deep spiritual darkness that took hold of those spaces. I observed how isolation and fear began to devour the souls of those who were imprisoned in that place. Without the presence of God, without the faith that sustained them, and without the ability to trust in divine provision, the people in those bunkers turned against one another with a ferocity that shook me to my core. They believed they could save themselves through their own efforts, Jesus explained, as I contemplated the horrible scenes unfolding before my eyes. However, true salvation is never achieved through human strength or wisdom. It is always achieved through faith and dependence on me. These people dedicated themselves to preparing their bodies, but neglected what is most essential: their souls. In the end, the only thing that truly matters is those souls. I witnessed how some of the richest and most influential people in the world, those who seemed so powerful and confident in their earthly lives, were consumed by despair and madness in their underground prisons. They had everything they believed they needed to survive, except for the one thing that truly matters: a connection with their Creator. The fourth vision transported me to a place that filled me with horror. Jesus revealed to me enormous distribution centers that were being established in cities around the world. There, thousands of people formed long lines, eager to receive what was promoted as a revolutionary identification system. The technology stood as the answer to all of humanity's challenges. It promised immediate access to healthcare, facilitated hassle-free financial transactions, and offered total security against crime and terrorism. This is the fourth place of death, that to which it refers. Jesus spoke these words with a voice so deep that it shook my soul. In these places, the mark of the beast will be imposed. Those who cross its doors and accept what is offered there will renounce their eternal soul, and there will be no possibility of redemption. The vision revealed to me the gradual process of implementing the system. At first it appeared as a mere convenience. Then, it transformed into an urgent necessity, and finally, it became an essential requirement for survival. I watched with sadness as entire families crumbled, as some of their members chose to accept the mark, while others resisted it. I witnessed how believers who had dedicated decades of their lives to the faithful service of God were suddenly forced to compromise their faith. All of this was happening amidst the anguish of not being able to buy food for their children or not having access to the medical care that their loved ones needed. The pressure to conform to the norms was more intense than ever. Those who refused to follow the rules were marginalized from all commercial activity, becoming unable to work, buy, and even access basic services. They transformed into multiple versions of themselves within their own societies, hunted and harassed for refusing to submit to the authoritarian system that had taken control of human civilization. However, what moved me the most was observing how the brand, in itself, radically transformed people. The moment someone received it, something deep inside them died. The connection between their soul and God was irreversibly broken, leaving them physically alive but spiritually dead. Although they could continue practicing religion, the light of divine life had been extinguished in them forever. However, even amidst that bleak vision, I could perceive the light of God's mercy shining brightly. Small groups of believers who had rejected the mark stood firm, supernaturally sustained in inhospitable deserts and remote places. Before proceeding, just one request: subscribe to the channel. That helps us a lot to continue. The angels offered them food and protection, just as they had previously done with Elijah by the brook Cherith. These faithful remnants shone with a spiritual light that made them appear as stars in the dense darkness that had fallen upon the earth. The fifth and final vision that Jesus revealed to me was, without a doubt, the most complete and terrifying of all. Before my eyes, the scene expanded, revealing vast regions of the land that had fallen into a state of inevitable chaos, the result of the convergence of natural disasters, wars, and supernatural trials. Before we continue, just one request: please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us keep going. Wide territories that once were fertile lands have transformed into desolate wastelands, where no form of life can thrive. Let us observe the coastal regions where millions have decided to settle. Jesus pointed it out, indicating areas of each continent. When the great earthquake arrives and the islands are forced to flee, when the mountains shift from their position and the seas roar, overflowing their limits, a terrifying scene will unfold before us. This will be the fifth place of death. Those who remain close to the shores when the final tremors begin will be swept away by waters that will rise beyond the tallest buildings. I watched in awe and terror as enormous tsunamis, generated by unprecedented magnitude earthquakes, devastated coastal cities around the world. Waves reaching hundreds of meters in height surged inland, sweeping away everything in their path in an unstoppable advance that stretched for kilometers. The devastation was so absolute that vast metropolitan areas were completely submerged in the raging waters, erasing any trace that millions of people ever inhabited and worked in those places. The vision revealed to me how these coastal disasters were intertwined with deeper spiritual realities. The most devastated areas were precisely those where humanity's rebellion against God had reached its peak. Cities that had celebrated sin, that had persecuted believers, and that had proclaimed themselves independent of divine authority. They were purified by the very elements that God had created. Once again, divine mercy made its presence felt, even in the midst of judgment. In the coastal areas, the Vicrelentes had received supernatural warnings urging them to move inland. Despite their deep roots in these coastal communities, many families felt an inexplicable urge that led them to relocate. These obedient souls had heeded the gentle voice of the Holy Spirit, thus managing to escape destruction by following God's guidance instead of relying on their own understanding. Upon concluding those 5 visions, Jesus turned to me, and in his eyes shone an infinite love and a deep concern. Ezekiel looked at me seriously and said, "You must return immediately and warn my people. Time is crucial, and the events you have witnessed will begin to unfold within months, not years. Those who heed these warnings and trust in my provision, rather than relying on their own strength, will find salvation. However, those who ignore this message or take their time to respond will find themselves trapped in places of death when the final hour arrives." The love that resonated in his voice was overwhelming, but there was also a palpable urgency. I understood that this message was not intended to instill fear, but to offer hope and a way out for those willing to listen and act. God's judgments always come accompanied by mercy for those who seek him with sincere hearts. At that moment, I felt my earthly body beginning to drag me back. But Jesus had one last message he wanted to share with me. "Tell them that I am their only refuge," he said. "Tell them that no earthly refuge, no human system or any preparation will save them unless I am their foundation. Invite them to come close to me while there is still time, for I will return soon. And when I return, it will be too late for those who have not reconciled with me." Before I returned to my worn body on that street in Tel Aviv, Jesus revealed to me one last vision that would forever transform my understanding of the urgency of these warnings. I found myself standing in what seemed to be a vast assembly hall, filled with millions of souls. At that moment, I understood that I was witnessing the tribunal of Christ, a place where each believer would give an account of their life. What I witnessed there broke my heart. I saw countless Jews and Christians who had led comfortable lives, who regularly attended synagogues and churches and considered themselves faithful. Yet at that moment they stood before Jesus with empty hands. They had dedicated their years on earth to building ephemeral kingdoms, chasing dreams that, like smoke, would fade into the air. They ignored the signs of the times that surrounded them. I, a rabbi, watched with sadness as many of my colleagues, who had preached tradition instead of preparation, were left speechless upon realizing how many souls had been lost due to their deception. They had insisted that the Messiah had not yet come, and in their blindness, they had contributed to the loss of hope in their congregations. I witnessed families who at one time had mocked those who warned about the tribulation. They had labeled the believers who were preparing as extremists and fanatics. However, in a heartbreaking turn, I saw them cry as they realized that their pride had led them to destruction. The most moving thing was to see the parents, standing before the throne, holding their children's hands with tears in their eyes. They understood in that moment how their disobedience to God's warnings had cost everything to their little ones. They were not evil people or rebels who deliberately challenged God. They simply were not ready. They were caught off guard by events that, despite being announced time and again, they chose to ignore. The vision revealed to me families who, despite the dangers of living in coastal cities, had decided to stay there, as they preferred to enjoy the stunning sea views rather than fear the judgment of God. I also observed believers who had chosen to remain in vast metropolitan areas. as they valued their careers and social relationships more than the security that the divine offers. I have witnessed Christians who placed their trust in their retirement savings and insurance policies, instead of seeking God's supernatural provision for their future. However, the most tragic scenes were those involving those who, despite having received clear warnings about the 5 places of death, chose to justify their inaction. There was a family in California that received a direct warning from a prophetic voice. They needed to move inland. However, they dismissed this message, considering it a mere emotional manipulation. Their seaside home was their greatest pride and joy, and it was unimaginable for them that God would ask them to give up something so beautiful. When the devastating tsunami struck, many people were swept away while they slept, clinging to a possession they valued more than obedience. I remember the case of a wealthy businessman from New York who had had multiple premonitory dreams about the collapse of financial systems. However, he had convinced himself that his diversified portfolio and his underground bunker in Manhattan would protect him from any economic disaster. When the electromagnetic pulse wiped out all electronic systems, his bunker turned into his tomb, and his fortune became worthless paper in a matter of hours. Amid this chaos, a devout and united Jewish family from Jerusalem felt the powerful call of the Holy Spirit urging them to leave the holy city. However, they were caught in a deep dilemma. How could God ask them to abandon the land that their ancestors had walked upon and revered? They remained in Judea when the abomination of desolation was raised, and their religious fervor became their downfall. They relied on their own understanding instead of following the clear divine instruction. There were young people who had received supernatural warnings about the distribution centers of the mark, but they had convinced themselves that God would protect them, even if they yielded to its demands. They had come to the conclusion that, despite their bodies bearing the mark of the beast, their hearts would remain pure. They did not understand that this choice would irreparably break their connection with God. The anguish they felt was indescribable, as they realized that their eternal destiny had been sealed by a decision they had believed to be momentary. However, perhaps the most shocking scenes were those that showed religious leaders who, through misleading teachings and faulty theology, had led entire congregations to destruction. I observed the rabbis who had proclaimed that the Messiah had not yet arrived. I wondered how they could explain to Jesus why they had left their faithful unprepared to face the greatest trial in the history of humanity. His noble intentions could not justify the devastation that his mistakes had caused. As the scenes of the trials unfolded before my eyes, Jesus spoke words that pierced my soul like arrows of fire. Many in my village will find their downfall, not because they have rejected me, but because they did not pay attention, did not listen, and did not prepare for what I clearly announced was coming. They prefer to cling to their comfort rather than heed my warnings, value their traditions more than my truth, and trust in their own wisdom above my teachings. The vision transformed, revealing to me the survivors who, attentive to the warnings, had managed to escape from the 5 places of death. These faithful ones shone with a radiant light, resembling living stars that stood out amidst the darkness that had covered the earth. They had lost their homes, their comfortable lives, and their social status, but in return, they had gained something much more valuable. They had regained their lives. My family, who had sold their houses in the coastal areas, decided to move to remote mountainous regions, fully trusting in God's provision instead of clinging to their own economic security. Despite the difficulties and uncertainty they faced, angels surrounded their humble homes, providing them with divine provisions every day. Their children, filled with joy, sang at dawn, even while living in tents. They understood that their parents had made the right decision at the most crucial moment of their lives. I witnessed how the believers had left the big cities just before the collapse, taking only what fit in a suitcase, but with hearts overflowing with faith and obedience. In the midst of adversity, they had formed communities in desert lands, where they provided mutual support during the darkest days the world had ever known. Their joy was evident, despite the difficult circumstances they faced. They knew they had followed the voice of their shepherd when he called them to move away from danger. The vision revealed small groups of Christians who, defying expectations, had refused to enter the underground bunkers that their wealthy friends had invited them to. Instead of seeking refuge in material security, they chose to trust in God's supernatural protection, embracing the beauty and risk of nature. When the bunkers turned into deadly traps, these devoted individuals found their sustenance in the manna from heaven and the water that flowed from the rocks, just as their ancestors did in the desert centuries ago. The most moving part of the entire story was the images of the believers who, despite the overwhelming pressure and relentless persecution, had decided to reject the mark of the beast. These brave individuals lived as fugitives, taking refuge in caves and hiding places in the forest, facing the harsh reality of being unable to buy or sell in a corrupt global system. Their unbreakable faith and determination shone through in the midst of adversity, making them true examples of resilience and hope. However, they emanated a peace and joy that no earthly comfort could offer them. They had chosen eternal life over fleeting comfort, and their reward was simply indescribable. When that final vision came to an end, Jesus turned to me once more, his eyes radiating infinite compassion and absolute authority. "Who is that?" he asked. These scenes symbolize the decisions being made at this very moment, in the days when you will return to the earth. Each person who hears these warnings will have the opportunity to decide whether to act accordingly or to remain idle. If you trust in my provision or in your own understanding, if you value the eternal over the temporal, tell them that I have revealed these visions not to frighten them, but to free them from the deception that has captivated so many of my people. Tell them that preparation is not limited to just storing food and water, although these elements are important. True preparation lies in cultivating a heart capable of hearing my voice clearly and having the faith necessary to obey immediately, even when my instructions seem to contradict human wisdom. The deepest tragedy of the impending tribulation will not lie in natural disasters or persecution, but in the alarming number of believers who, by choosing comfort over obedience, tradition over revelation, and human reasoning over divine instruction, will find themselves unprepared. However, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, these warnings become a beacon that illuminates a clear path to safety, both for themselves and for their families. Remember that I am the same God who warned Noah before the flood, who told Lot to flee before the destruction of Sodom, and who instructed the Israelites to put blood on the doorposts of their houses before the angel of death passed through Egypt. Throughout history, I have always warned my people before judgment arrived, and now I warn them again through visions like yours and through the clear signs that manifest around them. Time is running out. The events you have witnessed will begin to unfold months after your return. Those who act immediately following these warnings will find refuge and sustenance in the safe places I have indicated. However, those who take their time, those who seek to justify their decisions, those who convince themselves that God would not require such difficult decisions from his people, will discover too late that my words are not mere suggestions, but mandates that determine life or death. As Jesus spoke his last words, an irresistible force drew me back to my body, which lay in that street in Tel Aviv. The heavenly kingdom began to fade around me, but the weight of the message received pressed upon my spirit like a mantle of divine responsibility. I understood that I had been chosen, not for any special righteousness or wisdom on my part, but because God needed a witness to faithfully proclaim what had been revealed, without softening the urgency or compromising the clarity of his warnings. The return to earthly consciousness was abrupt and painful. My spirit, which had transcended dimensions of glory and revelation, suddenly found itself trapped in a broken and bleeding body. Although physical pain flooded my nervous system, the visions remained vivid in my memory, preserved by divine power to be shared with a world that longed to hear what heaven announced about the days to come. 3 days later, I woke up in the Hadassah and Inquarim Hospital in Jerusalem. The doctors described my recovery as a true miracle, as I had suffered multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and a head trauma that, according to specialists, should have been fatal. Upon opening my eyes, the first person who appeared before me was my daughter Esther. She had traveled from New York as soon as she heard about the accident. Tears were streaming from her eyes as she realized I was conscious. "Abba, you have returned," she whispered as she took my hand. The doctors had said there was no hope. "Esther," I replied with a weak but urgent voice, "I have seen the Messiah. It was Jesus." Everything we have rejected for generations. We were wrong. He is real and will return very soon. I could see the confusion and concern reflected in her eyes. She thought I was delirious, either from the medication or from the brain injury. How could an Orthodox rabbi, who had dedicated his life to Jewish tradition, suddenly declare that Jesus was the Messiah? It was inconceivable to her, just as it would have been for me only a few days earlier. In the days and weeks that followed my physical recovery, the spiritual distance between my community and me became increasingly evident. As I shared my thoughts with my fellow rabbis, I initially encountered disbelief, then a growing concern, and finally, an open rejection. The synagogue that had been my spiritual home for 4 decades was now closing its doors to me. My books were taken off the shelves and my name erased from the records, as if I had never existed. The price of sharing the truth was high, but infinitely lower than the cost of keeping it to myself. How could I remain silent when I had been entrusted with warnings that could save countless lives? How could I prioritize my position, my reputation, or my comfort, knowing what was coming? That is why I have decided to dedicate my last years to traveling, to speaking, and to warning all those who are willing to listen. To my Jewish brothers and sisters I say, the Messiah you have been waiting for has already come and will return. Do not repeat the mistake that our generations made by rejecting it. To Christians I say, your Savior calls you to come out of modern Babylon. Do not cling to systems that will soon disappear. Do not trust in the ephemeral. The riches that will soon fade into dust have led me to understand the true meaning of Deuteronomy 30:19, where God tells us, "Today I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life then, so that you and your descendants may live." Now, we all face this crucial decision. The 5 paths of death await those who ignore divine warnings, while the shelters of protection await those who listen and obey. Tribulation is at the door, but God's mercy continues to call to those willing to listen. As a man who spent 70 years rejecting the truth that I now proclaim, I implore you, do not wait until you are on the brink of death to recognize Jesus as I finally did. Time is limited, and the decision is urgent. Choose today whom you will serve. Choose life. What a profound and moving revelation. The Bible offers us a powerful warning in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. Today I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. I have given you the option to choose between life and death, between blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life so that you and your descendants may live. This exhortation invites us to reflect on our decisions and their impact on the future. Thank you very much. I want to pay tribute to the Rabbi who with courage has shared this powerful message of warning and hope. And to you, who have been attentive until this moment, I wish that divine protection surrounds you in your homes and that your hearts remain receptive to the voice of God. We will meet in the next video